Why should we pay people to have kids? Do we even want more kids? Doesn't this discriminate against people who don't have kids? The answer to the last question is yes. Frankly, I'm okay with that. That's probably why I've never been for a universal basic income, and instead have always favored policies like this. And it also answers a lot of questions that some of you level at me all the time. What exactly makes you conservative, Saagar? You're looking at it right here. So I don't think government policy or our culture should be centered around maximizing individual liberty and choice. I think it should be centered around making it easy as possible to fulfill the most basic task of a civilization, which is replacing itself and producing prosperity for the current and future generation. Nothing about our consumerist culture of today is maximizing these goals. It is the opposite of conservative, when your supposedly free trade and markets have created a culture where it's cheaper to eat crappy food, buy plastic stuff, and watch TV every day rather than have children and get married. As I've said repeatedly in recent days, people don't even want to watch TV all day or just buy stuff. They're simply responding to the incentives within the economic system. As journalist Matt Iglesias has shown repeatedly, surveys of Americans show that they want 2.5 kids on average, but in practice have far fewer, only 1.72 in 2018. That's a huge gap, and it requires for us to think a little bit. People want more kids but aren't having them. Well, clearly, it's too hard to have kids. What's the barrier to kids in our culture? It's money. It's cost of having a child. It's healthcare, all the externalities, having to leave your job, stuff like that. So the solution is simple. Make it more economically viable to have children. It's the simplest solution on the planet, which many people on the reformist right have actually identified now for nearly a decade. And yet somehow the guy whose defeat and terrible policy ideas in 2012 who sparked this movement is the person who seems to have embraced it. Except this time, it's finally biting her in the ass. Lorenz has been leading a crusade against Clubhouse because a bunch of people on the app once held a discussion about how terrible of a reporter she is. Since then, the New York Times has basically allowed her to rage tweet about how awful the app is, about how it's supposedly a den of the far right, and more. She's taken it upon herself to lead a personal jihad, especially against one of the star people on Clubhouse, and one of its investors, its billionaire venture capitalist, Marc Andreessen. So it was that over the weekend that Lorenz tweeted out that Andreessen supposedly, while in discussion on the app, used the R-word slur on Clubhouse, and that not a single person in the room even called him on it. Wow, that seems really bad, right? There's just one problem. It never happened. Zero. It was a made-up lie. Lorenz later clarified that she'd heard a male voice use the word. Actually, it was a female voice, and the context was it was used to describe how Redditors on Wall Street Bets refer to themselves, which I find kind of hilarious, and anybody else who's familiar with the subreddit does too. But what made this worse is the reaction. The person who actually was moderating the discussion clarified this was a lie, and that it wasn't said by Andreessen. Lorenz thanked her for the clarification, locked her account, and has refused to apologize for falsely spreading a vicious smear about somebody that she has personal beef with on a platform she's openly campaigned against for months. So why does this all matter? Because the Trump era in media made Taylor Lorenz and her power and her ilk. Her career has been one of professional tattletaling and standing for China in order to leapfrog publications all the way to the pages of the so-called paper of record. Her greatest hits include trying to cancel Mr. Beast for a bad word he said when he was 19, and targeting the well-known Run Girl with No Job Instagram account because her mom was someone that people find objectionable. Since then, she has used her position at the Times to openly campaign for TikTok to not be banned in the United States. Left unsaid is Lorenz is writing a book about TikTok, that she actually rose to prominence by cataloging the app and its explosion across the United States, and that much of her own professional use to the New York Times readership would be majorly diminished if it was banned. She's unironically tried to equate Facebook's data privacy laws with the Chinese government's use of private data to pursue their own foreign policy ends. In short, she's the worst, but she's made a lot of money and gotten a lot of attention for being so. That is, until now. She finally crossed a line. Nobody came to her defense in this episode, as they have time and time again, as the resistant mobs began to fade, and the dollars and the clicks and the incentives that allowed so-called journalists like Lorenz to prosper in our ecosystem. It will begin to fade away. Previous cancellation attempts came under the guise of rooting out hate at a time when hate was conflated with Trump, thus permissible. Without their boogeyman, the professional tattletalers like Lorenz are losing their powerful news hook, and they are being revealed as the miserable people that they really are. Yesterday morning, Washington awoke to a beautiful tale in People magazine, of all places. How Alexei McAmmond, a frequent NBC News guest and star political reporter for Axios, was in a relationship with TJ Ducklo. He's a White House deputy press secretary. He's the former press secretary for the Joe Biden campaign. The fluff piece details how McAmmond and Ducklo waited until November to start dating, how she was so in love that she asked to be reassigned to another beat from the White House. Okay, interesting. Good for them. Let's take a look under the hood. McAmmond says she was reassigned from covering the White House and to, yes, this is not a joke, covering progressives in Congress along with Vice President Kamala Harris. So a star political reporter literally dating the deputy White House press secretary was reassigned from Joe Biden to covering the Vice President of the United States, who of course also works for the White House and of course also is tied to the administration. Amazing. Conflicts of interest all solved. Even better, though, was the backstory of the story itself. Within the People magazine profile was a line from the two about how it was the worst kept secret in Washington. Maybe, because as all bad kept secrets in Washington, it was about to premiere in Politico Playbook this morning. In fact, Playbook, the insider newsletter that many people in D.C. read daily, revealed that on Monday, they had informed the White House comms team that the dating item would be included the next day. Hours later, the People magazine story surfaced, and the Biden White House staffers started pumping it out on Twitter to get a jump on the news. It's a tried and a true strategy. When a bad story is about to come out, you leak the details to a friendly outlet and you control the framing. By and large, that's basically what happened here, because the truth is a lot more murky than the one that was laid out in People. As Playbook has noted in the story that was rightfully theirs, McAmmond hasn't exactly left the Biden beat. Per her and Ducklo's own timeline, they disclosed their relationship to Axios and to the White House in November. Well, on December 19th, a story appeared in Axios about how Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms had rejected Joe Biden's offer to be the next head of the U.S. Small Business Administration. Maybe she got that story from her sources, or maybe she got it from her boyfriend. There's no real way to know. That's the problem. If there's not a clear line and there isn't a clear standard, then we ask questions which cast doubt on the journalistic profession as a whole. Wow, what? Music to my ears, right? Let's keep reading. Quote, top Republican officials tell Axios that if the party is going to survive, it needs to copy Donald Trump's fixation on blue-collar voters in 2016 and working-class and minority voters in 2020, and ditch or at least downplay allegiance to big business. Okay, still sounding pretty good, like a real realization that something has got to give at the top of the party, that maybe they can fulfill what Trump started, accelerate the realignment of American politics, and actually try to win an election for once with working class voters. They even have the data to back it up. Incredibly, they even admit, quote, event polling shows Republican voters no longer coalesce around tax cuts and entitlement reforms and see many, quote, signs their future might rest in protecting traditional workers and traditional values. It's all 100% right. There's just one teeny little problem. They are not actually going to do any of that. One of the people they cite in the article as recognizing the future is House Leader Kevin McCarthy, who has said the future of the party is fighting for the American worker. Great. And that the way to do that is to, quote, fight back against socialism. There it is. So exactly the same messaging tactics of the last 40 years. Do I think socialism is bad? Yeah, of course. But I also know a fugazi when I see one. If you use the same messaging, then you're going to default to the same policy. That's exactly what's happening right now. The future of the GOP, if it wants one, is indeed a working class party. But the problem is to actually fulfill that destiny and expand outside of working class whites, limited Hispanics and blacks who came along for Trump's cultural appeal. Then you actually need to do something. And on that front, the evidence is mixed to non-existent. Let's take the current situation. The most dire and pressing thing before the American people is coronavirus and the attendant economic depression. Millions of people on unemployment, on the verge of losing their houses after this is all over, on the verge of having their state government or local government go bankrupt. You all know the picture. Well, to a T, literally, there is not a single Republican who actually supports Biden's $1.9 trillion bill. Not really on the objections to the actual allocations of money, but on the objection that it's simply too big. Guess what? Guess what actual people think? Yeah, they think what pretty much everybody else thinks. 1.9 trillion sounds great. 80% of Americans support the stimulus bill at exactly that figure. There are double the amount of people who think that 1.9 trillion is too little than those who think it is too much. The current GOP gripes, even from Josh Hawley, is that it's packed full of stuff that only Democrats want. Okay, that's fair, but they won the election, and it's not like anyone in the GOP is offering up literally anything else.